At 7:27 p.m. on February 9, 2004, a woman named Faith Westman looked out her window on a dark stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, and saw a car in the snowbank outside her house. At 7:29 p.m., a Haverhill police officer was dispatched to the scene. At 7:42 p.m., a school bus driver named Butch Atwood pulled over to help. He talked to a young woman standing next to the wrecked car. She told him she was fine. She said she'd already called AAA. He offered her a ride. She said no. At 7:46 p.m., 4 minutes after that conversation, police arrived at the crash. And the woman was gone. No footprints leading away in fresh snow. No blood. No sign of a struggle. Her purse was still in the car. Her cell phone, gone. Her wallet, gone. A box of wine spilled across the back seat. Her school books, still packed for a trip she never explained to anyone. Her name was Maura Murray. She was 21 years old, a nursing student, a former West Point cadet, a state champion runner, and in the 20-plus years since that night, she has never been seen again. This case has been called the first true crime mystery of the internet age, because 5 days before Maura vanished, Facebook didn't even exist yet. What started as a handful of message board threads turned into one of the most obsessively investigated disappearances in American history. Books, podcasts, a docuseries, thousands of amateur detectives combing through cell phone records, receipts, and 911 transcripts, line by line, for 2 decades. And in the last 2 years, something happened that nobody saw coming. A fingerprint, sitting in an evidence locker since 2004, was finally matched to a name. That name belongs to a man who was, by his own admission, involved with Maura at West Point, and who is now sitting in prison for something else entirely. We're going to walk through exactly what happened that night, what Maura did in the 24 hours before she disappeared, the theories investigators have chased for 2 decades, and the new lead that has reopened this case in a way nobody expected. This is the disappearance of Maura Murray. Before she was a name attached to a cold case, Maura Murray was, by every account, the kid other parents pointed to as an example. Born May 4, 1982, in Brockton, Massachusetts, she was the 4th of 5 children raised by Fred and Lori Murray in Hanson, a small town about 30 miles south of Boston. Her parents split up when she was 6, and she grew up mostly with her mother, but both parents stayed close to her and her siblings, her brother Fred, her sisters Kathleen and Julie, and a younger half-brother Kurt. At Whitman-Hanson Regional High School, Maura was a standout on the track and cross-country teams, the kind of athlete who qualified for elite academies. That talent, combined with strong grades, got her accepted into the United States Military Academy at West Point. At West Point, she studied chemical engineering. It's also where she met Bill Rausch, a fellow cadet who would become her longtime boyfriend, and, by the time she disappeared, her fiancé. But West Point wasn't smooth sailing for Maura. In the summer of 2001, during a training exercise at Fort Knox, Kentucky, she was accused of stealing cosmetics from the base store. It triggered a formal honor investigation, and according to people close to her at the time, she was likely facing expulsion. Rather than face that outcome, Maura withdrew from West Point in January 2002 and transferred to the University of Massachusetts Amherst to study nursing. By all accounts, she thrived there too. She made the dean's list. She worked a part-time security job on campus and a job at a local art gallery. She was described by friends as quiet, driven, athletic, someone who loved hiking with her father in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a detail that would later feel almost unbearably ironic. She had a job lined up after graduation, a nursing position in Oklahoma, where Bill was stationed with the Army. On paper, February 2004 should have been an unremarkable month in an otherwise promising life. It wasn't. To understand what happened on February 9th, you have to understand what happened in the days leading up to it, because almost every person who has studied this case agrees something was building. On Thursday, February 5th, 4 days before she vanished, Maura took a phone call at her campus security job. Her supervisor, Karen Mayotte, later described what she saw. Maura sitting at her desk, staring straight through her, unable to speak. When she finally got a word out, it was 2 words: my sister. Mayotte walked her back to her dorm. We still don't fully know what that call was about. What we do know is that later that same night, Maura had what witnesses called a breakdown during a work shift and had to be escorted back to her room by a supervisor. 2 days later, on Friday, February 6th, or in the very early hours of Saturday the 7th, something else happened near campus. A UMass economics student named Petrit Vasi was struck by a hit-and-run driver just off campus, around 12:20 a.m. Cell phone records show Maura was on a call with her boyfriend Bill at 12:07 a.m. that same night, 13 minutes before Vasi was found. To be clear, there has never been any evidence linking Maura's car to that hit-and-run. It's one of dozens of strange, overlapping coincidences from that week that investigators and amateur sleuths have never been able to fully explain. But it's a fact worth knowing, because everything that week seemed to happen in 3s and 4s, all crowding together right before she disappeared. Then, on Saturday, February 7th, into Sunday the 8th, Maura borrowed her father's car. He was in town visiting, to go to a dorm party. On her way back to his motel, around 3:30 in the morning, she crashed into a guardrail. It caused close to $10,000 in damage. Her father, Fred, wasn't angry. He told her not to worry, that insurance would cover it, and had her stay the rest of the night in his motel room. No field sobriety test was recorded. At 4:49 that morning, a call was placed from Fred's cell phone to Bill Rausch. Nobody has ever said publicly what was said on that call. Later that same day, Sunday, February 8th, still, Fred rented a car, dropped Maura back at her dorm, and drove home to Connecticut. That night, he called to remind her to pick up accident report paperwork for the crash. She had wrecked 2 cars in under 72 hours, and in less than 24 hours, she would disappear in the second one. Monday, February 9th, 2004. This is where nearly every detail has been picked apart, time-stamped, and argued over for 20 years. Here's what the record actually shows. Just after midnight, Maura sat down at her computer and searched MapQuest for directions, to the Berkshires, and separately, to Burlington, Vermont. 2 very different destinations, in opposite directions from each other, both far from anywhere she told anyone she was going. At 1 p.m., she emailed Bill. The message was short. She said she loved him, that she'd gotten his messages, but didn't feel like talking to much of anyone, and promised to call later. It would be the last written communication between them. At 1:13 p.m., she called a fellow nursing student to arrange returning some borrowed clothes. At 1:24 p.m., she sent an email to her professors and her work supervisor. She told them there had been a death in the family and that she'd be away for a week. There had been no death in the family. At 2:05 p.m., she called a Vermont tourism reservation line for the town of Stowe. The call lasted under a minute. The line was apparently down, and nothing was booked. At 3:15 p.m., surveillance cameras caught her at an ATM in Hadley, Massachusetts, withdrawing $280, nearly everything in her account. From there, she drove to a liquor store, returned bottles and cans for a small deposit, and bought roughly $40 of alcohol, Bailey's, Kahlua, vodka, and a box of Franzia wine. At 4:37 p.m., she checked her voicemail. It is the last confirmed use of her cell phone. Sometime that afternoon, she packed up her dorm room, not everything, but a significant amount, and loaded her black 1996 Saturn. She left campus and started driving north on Route 91, then east, deeper into rural New Hampshire, in the general direction of nowhere in particular that anyone could later explain. By 7 p.m., she was on Route 112 in Haverhill, also known locally as Wild Amanuset Road, a winding, poorly lit road that cuts through the White Mountains, roughly 2 hours from campus. It was cold. It was starting to snow. At a sharp curve in the road, her Saturn went off the pavement and into a snowbank. This is the part of the story that made Maura Murray a name true crime audiences still can't let go of, because what should have been a routine if unlucky single-car accident on a snowy road turned into something no one has ever been able to fully explain. At 7:27 p.m., Faith Westman, who lived near the curve, saw the crash from her window and called it in. She told the dispatcher she thought she saw a man near the car, smoking a cigarette, a detail her husband would later dispute, saying he thought it was just a glowing red brake light. At 7:29 p.m., Officer Cecil Smith of the Haverhill Police was dispatched. At 7:42 p.m., Butch Atwood, a local school bus driver who lived nearby, pulled over. This is the only confirmed, direct human contact anyone has ever had with Maura after the crash. He described her as shook up, but not hurt. Their exchange, according to Atwood's own account, went something like this. He asked if she was okay. She said she was fine, just shaken. He offered to call the police for her. She told him not to. She said she'd already called AAA. That detail alone has fueled 2 decades of debate, because investigators later determined there was little to no cell phone coverage on that stretch of road in 2004. If that's true, how could she have called AAA? Did she lie to get rid of him? Was there another explanation, a landline somewhere nearby, a call that simply never went through and left no record? Nobody knows. Atwood, satisfied she was safe and had help coming, drove home. He lived within sight of the crash site. At 7:46 p.m., by most accounts, 7 to 9 minutes after Atwood's call to 911, Officer Smith arrived at the scene. The car was there. Maura Murray was not. There were no footprints leading away from the vehicle. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Search dogs would later pick up her scent for roughly 100 yards heading east along the road, and then it simply stopped, as though she'd gotten into a vehicle. Inside the car, police found her AAA card, her CDs, makeup, school books, the box of wine, partially spilled. A rag stuffed into the tailpipe, something her father had taught her to do to stop exhaust smoke from a faulty engine, which raised its own strange question. Was that meant to disguise the car, or was it just routine maintenance from days earlier? Her cell phone and her bank cards were missing. Most of her other belongings were still packed inside, untouched. In the span of roughly 19 minutes, from the moment Faith Westman first spotted the crash to the moment Officer Smith arrived, Maura Murray disappeared from a stretch of dark, freezing rural road in the middle of winter and has not been definitively seen or heard from since. Here's the part of this story that still frustrates investigators and the Murray family to this day. For the first several critical days, police did not treat this as a criminal case. Because Maura had lied to her professors about a death in the family, because she'd withdrawn nearly all her cash, because she'd packed up parts of her dorm room and left no explanation to anyone, investigators initially leaned toward a theory that she had voluntarily walked away from her own life. A young woman under stress, choosing to disappear. That theory meant the urgency that should have come with a possible abduction, sealing off the area, an immediate large-scale search, treating the crash site as an active crime scene, didn't happen right away. By the time the investigation escalated, the trail, if there ever was one, had gone cold in the New Hampshire winter. The FBI joined the search 10 days after she vanished. Helicopters with thermal imaging, snowshoe search teams, and cadaver dogs combed the area in the weeks that followed. They found nothing. In 2009, the case was handed to New Hampshire's Cold Case Unit, where it remains open today, officially classified as suspicious. A $5,000 reward has stood for years for information leading to an arrest. In the absence of hard evidence, 4 competing theories have dominated the conversation around Maura Murray for 2 decades. None of them have ever been proven. All of them have holes. Theory 1. She walked away and got lost in the cold. The simplest explanation is often the most devastating one. Under this theory, Maura left the crash site on foot, possibly disoriented, possibly intoxicated. A red-stained bottle in her car led some to speculate she'd been drinking and succumbed to exposure somewhere in the dense, mountainous terrain surrounding Route 112. The problem: this is one of the most heavily searched patches of woods in New England history, Helicopters, cadaver dogs, snowshoe teams, and thousands of volunteer searchers have covered the area for 20 years. No remains have ever surfaced. Theory 2. She accepted a ride and chose to disappear. This was the working theory for New Hampshire and Vermont police for years, that Maura, under some private pressure nobody around her fully understood, orchestrated her own disappearance. The evidence people point to, the fabricated story about a death in the family, the withdrawal of nearly all her cash, the packed belongings, the searches for hotels in Burlington, and directions to the Berkshires, 2 destinations in opposite directions, as if she hadn't decided or wanted to leave a false trail. The problem, her family has always rejected this theory outright. She had no history of mental illness, no documented plan, and no contact with anyone, not her parents, not her siblings, not her fiancé, in 20+ years. People who vanish voluntarily eventually leave some trace. Maura never has. Theory 3. A passing motorist offered a ride, and something happened. This is the theory Maura's own family has increasingly leaned toward, especially in more recent years. Private investigator Lou Barry, hired by the Murray family, pieced together the case's timeline and told reporters directly that he believes Maura was likely taken, not necessarily against her will at first. His theory, someone she may have interacted with, a stranger, or possibly someone connected to a party she'd been at days earlier, offered her a ride after the crash, and what began as help turned into something far darker. Theory 4. Someone from her past was already involved before she ever reached Route 112. This is where the case gets genuinely unsettling, because it doesn't rely on a chance encounter with a stranger on a dark road. It suggests that whatever happened to Maura may have started before she ever crashed her car, connected to something or someone from her life at West Point. That fourth theory is the one that, 20 years later, just got a piece of hard physical evidence behind it for the first time. For most of the past 2 decades, this case had almost no forensic breakthroughs, just theories, timelines, and increasingly obsessive internet debate. That changed in March 2025. Inside Maura's abandoned Saturn, police had recovered a CD, or CD case, with an unidentified fingerprint on it, evidence that sat, unmatched, in a database for years. Fingerprint technology and databases have improved dramatically since 2004, and cold case investigators routinely rerun old evidence through updated systems, hoping for a hit that wasn't possible before. In 2020, a man named Stephen Baldwin, born Stephen Finkelstein, was arrested in Ohio on unrelated charges. His fingerprints were entered into the National AFIS database as a matter of routine. Not long after, a detective with New Hampshire's cold case unit contacted Ohio investigators. Baldwin's print was a match for the unidentified print found in Maura Murray's car in 2004. Here's who Stephen Baldwin is. He attended West Point at the same time as Maura, under his birth name. By his own account, the two had a relationship while they were cadets together, and he acted as her representative during the disciplinary hearing tied to the Fort Knox incident that ultimately pushed her out of the academy. He left West Point within about a week of when Maura withdrew, and at some point after Maura disappeared in 2004, he changed his name. In the years since, Baldwin built a public reputation in the Midwest as a dog rescue advocate, running his own rescue organization in central Ohio, presenting himself as a dog whisperer who could rehabilitate aggressive or unadoptable animals. That reputation collapsed in spectacular fashion. In January 2024, following a trial with testimony from more than 50 witnesses, Baldwin was convicted on 32 counts, including animal cruelty, grand theft, bribery, telecommunications fraud, tampering with evidence, and impersonating an officer. Investigators found that he'd solicited money from grieving pet owners and rescue groups by promising to save dogs labeled dangerous or unadoptable, and then euthanized many of those animals without permission, keeping the money for himself. In March 2025, he was sentenced to 15.5 years in prison. It was during the investigation into his animal rescue fraud that his fingerprints entered the system and connected him, more than 2 decades later, to Maura Murray's car. In the spring of 2024, the FBI visited Baldwin and questioned him directly about the print. According to his own account, agents told him his fingerprint had been found on a CD or CD case inside Maura's Saturn. He denied any involvement in her disappearance. He later sent an email to the investigating agent, describing memories of his time with Maura at West Point, including, he claimed, a time he got in trouble for having her in his dorm room, and said he believed another cadet may have been stalking her, though he couldn't provide a full name. There is one more detail that has surfaced from people who knew Baldwin personally. According to a former girlfriend who came forward after his conviction, 2 of his previous partners have died, one from an overdose, one in a car crash while intoxicated, and she has stated publicly that she believes his behavior contributed to both deaths. To be absolutely clear about what this fingerprint does and does not prove, a print on a CD case shows Baldwin's hand touched an item that was, at some point, inside that car. It does not, on its own, prove he was present the night Maura vanished, and it does not amount to a criminal charge. He has never been charged in connection with her disappearance, and he has consistently denied any involvement. But after 20 years with almost no forensic movement in this case, it is the single most concrete physical link investigators have ever found between anyone and Maura Murray's vehicle. And it's a link to someone from the most turbulent chapter of her life, right before everything fell apart. Baldwin isn't the only figure from Maura's inner circle whose name has resurfaced in a courtroom in recent years. Bill Rausch, her longtime boyfriend, and by the time she vanished, her fiancé, has separately faced serious legal trouble unrelated to the Maura Murray case, including a felony case that has drawn renewed attention from true crime researchers simply because of his connection to her story. It's important to be careful here. Legal trouble decades after the fact, on entirely separate charges, is not evidence of involvement in a 2004 disappearance. Investigators have never named him a suspect, but it's added yet another layer to a case where nearly every person in Maura's orbit that winter has, at some point, come back into the spotlight. It's also worth noting, rumors have circulated for years that Maura and Rausch's relationship was under strain, with reports of infidelity on both sides, and that Maura had confided in others, including her track coach, about wanting to get away from what she described as a controlling relationship. None of this has ever been tied to her disappearance, but it speaks to how much turmoil was sitting underneath the surface of a life that, from the outside, looked completely put together. In February 2024, on the 20th anniversary of her disappearance, New Hampshire investigators released an official age progression image of what Maura might look like today, at 43 years old, a quiet acknowledgement that, however unlikely, the possibility she is still alive has never been formally closed off. Her sister Julie Murray has spent 2 decades as the public face of the family's search, pushing for continued investigation, giving interviews, and, more recently, working to counter years of online harassment directed at the family by amateur internet sleuths who've turned this case into something closer to a competitive puzzle than a missing persons tragedy. Her father, Fred Murray, has said publicly, more than once, that he believes his daughter is dead, and that he believes she was taken from that road that night. Julie has described the family's evolution in blunt terms. What began as the hope of literally bringing Maura home for a holiday dinner has become something heavier, the hope of simply knowing what happened. Not closure in the neat television sense of the word, just an answer. We have grappled with the fact that we will most likely never see Maura again, she said. But I've never once thought that I needed to be okay with never having an answer. The New Hampshire Cold Case Unit says the investigation remains open and active. Anyone with information is asked to contact them directly at 603-223-3856. 20-plus years later, we know almost everything about the 10 minutes before Maura Murray disappeared, and almost nothing about the 10 minutes after. We know who she called, what she bought, what she searched for online, down to the second. and we still don't know where she is. A fingerprint doesn't close a case like this, but it's the first genuinely new piece of the puzzle this investigation has had in years, and it's a reminder that cold cases aren't actually cold. They're just waiting for the right database, the right arrest, somewhere else entirely, the right person to finally come forward. If you have any information about the disappearance of Maura Murray, the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit wants to hear from you. If you want the full breakdown of the 4 theories investigators are still weighing, or the deep dive on what happened inside that West Point disciplinary hearing, let me know in the comments. That might be the next case we open up.